Hello, good morning. This is our first meeting, Block B, on assessment of student learning. In regular classes, assessment of learning 1 and assessment of learning 2 totals 108 hours. 54 for assessment of student learning 1 and 54 hours for assessment of student learning 2. But in our class, we only have 1 hour, not really 1 hour, but 8 hours for the first assessment and another 8 hours for the second assessment, totaling 16 hours. So there is really so much to learn and so much to do to cover the 108 hours. Are we ready for this? A lot of things will be left for you to do. You will be given the lecture online or in print if you like, in modular form, your choice. Meanwhile, you're going to listen to this recording. Okay? Shall we start? The objectives of today's lecture, as you can see on screen, are as follows. I am going to situate assessment in the outcome-based education. Why is that? Because CHED tells higher education institutions to use outcomes-based education as mode of instructional delivery. So we will start with that. The next thing that we are going to try to accomplish is to explain the multiple roles of assessment in learning. We shall also define commonly used assessment terms. And this next one will involve you because we are going to write instructional objectives that are observable and directly measurable learning outcomes. It's very important that you learn how to do this because every day in your teaching, you will be writing instructional objectives. Besides, the instructional objectives will be the basis of our assessment. So the instructional objectives will be your guide in delivering your lectures or whatever mode of instructional delivery you are going to use, and it will be used as basis for assessing whether or not your students learn from you. The next thing that we are going to do today will be to describe characteristics of measurement options, including selected response measures, performance assessment, and portfolios. Why is it necessary for us to do this or to learn the characteristics of these various measurement options? Because the first course, learning or assessment of student learning 1, is all about traditional assessment. The assessment that you had been subjected to all throughout your schooling. So we will concentrate on this And the next time we meet, we will concentrate on the other way assessment is done, which is what we call alternative assessment. Meanwhile, we will finish this afternoon, today's lecture, focusing on traditional assessment. We shall also try to identify the different types of alternative assessment in preparation for our next meeting. So in all, this is what we're going to do today. Okay? Let's try to understand what OBE, or other educators call it OBTL. OBE short for outcomes-based education, and OBTL short for outcomes-based teaching and learning. See, what happens in the classroom is teaching and learning. Even if we are not in the classroom right now, I'm doing the teaching in the hope that you will be doing the learning. So, in fact, we are engaged in teaching and learning. Now, what is OBE or OBTL? As you can see on the screen, it is a results-oriented approach to education, which sets out the outcomes in terms of attributes and abilities students are expected to attain at 3 levels. What are these levels? The institutional level, that's the school level. The program level, your course program level, what's your program? CPT. And the course level. What's the course? Assessment of Student Learning 1 and 2. I'll repeat, no? Outcomes in terms of attributes or characteristics and abilities students are expected to attain at these levels. So we need to understand what are these attributes and abilities students are expected to attain at the institutional level, the program level, and the course level. Let's try to learn more about OBE or OBTL. The roots of OBE or OBTL can be traced to professional education, aiming to equip learners with knowledge, skills, and attitudes, in short, KSA. So when you hear the acronym KSA, it means knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Ulit po, ano? We aim to equip learners with knowledge, skills, and attitudes to perform competently. How? Competently in professional work situations. In your case, you intend to become teachers. Once you pass the licensure examination, you will start teaching, then you will be called professional teachers. Without the license, even if you are asked to teach already, you cannot be called a professional. How to become a professional or how to be called a professional, it's not in my lecture, it's not on the screen. It's just an add-on, no? But you have to understand because we are preparing you or you are preparing yourself to become professionals. Firstly, one has to undergo a rigorous training, 4 years, 5 years in the case of engineering and other disciplines or fields of studies, 8 years in case of medicine. No? So you have to undergo, in case of teachers, would-be managers, you need to undergo at least 4 years of rigorous academic training. That's the first criterion. The second criterion is you must be able to pass a licensure examination. In your case, you are aiming to become teachers, you need to pass the teacher's licensure examination or licensure examination for teachers. That's the left for you. The third criterion is you must live by the code of ethics of your profession. So in other words, practically all professions have their own code of ethics. In our case, teachers, we have the code of ethics for teachers. That's aside from the Magna Carta of school teachers, we also have code of ethics for teachers that we have to live by. So, if we don't live by this code of ethics, what happens? We can get ourselves into trouble, and we can lose our license. So we have to be very familiar with what we should and shouldn't do. And this will be discussed with you in other courses. No? Let me just say that that's the third criterion, to live by the code of ethics of your profession. In our case, the teaching profession. And last, which is a tough thing to do. What is it? The last criterion is you must be able to contribute to the growth of your field of study or discipline. What do we mean by you should be able to contribute to the growth or development of your field of study or discipline? What do we mean by that? How do we contribute? In short, we must undertake research. We must undertake research because by doing so, you are sharing what you have acquired in the form of knowledge, theories, whatever the result of your research is. You are able to share this to your colleagues in the profession. So, you must be able to do this. As I said, the fourth one is a tough thing to do. It's very difficult. Even seasoned teachers sometimes are hard put to undertake research. Firstly, because of lack of time. Secondly, because of the difficulty of doing research. So anyway, if we want to be called professionals, then we have to exert effort to be able to do research. Anyway, let's say you're a very dedicated teacher, learning how to share your knowledge to your students. So you do all possible ways by which you can do this efficiently. So there are things like we call best practices, no? How are these best practices generated? When you see that what you do in the form of teaching maximizes students' learning. In other words, your teaching is found effective. The manner by which you deliver your lesson is found effective. Then you can write about this. No? What is it that you have done to get the students to learn faster and better? How were you able to teach your students in such a way that there is greater mastery of the concepts and processes that you have taught. What techniques or approaches or strategies or methodologies have you used? So just record this. Just have a narrative of this. You try it on and find that indeed this methodology or strategy works. And so you write it and share this. This, in fact, is in its simplest manner. This also may be called a practical research. So, in fact, there are many things that we can do and share with others to improve the learning of our students. Just carry on writing down what you have done to help the students learn. And maybe you can pull these ideas together and come up with what might be called a research, practical research. Okay, let me go back to my lecture. How many criteria are there to be called a professional? I mentioned 4. You don't have a license yet, so you're working for that. You are done with your 4-year training. So in fact, of the 4 criteria that I mentioned, you have passed only just 1 of the 4. Okay. Have a copy of the Code of Ethics of a professional teacher. Put that in your notebook and live by it. Then you meet the 3rd criteria. Pass the licensure examination, prepare for that. You met the 2nd criteria, and try to do research as you go along, as you progress in your teaching. All right. Now that you have understood professional, competently, to perform competently in professional work situations. All right, let's move on. Why OBE or OBTL? As you can see on the screen, OBE or OBTL is in response to, firstly, the changing nature of work and skill requirement in the workforce and the workplace. There is so much accountability that we need to put in when we do teaching. We are accountable for our students' learning. And as you can see, the demands for teachers nowadays is getting tougher and tougher, especially with the COVID-19. Imagine, the efforts that teachers have to put in to be able to meet the requirements of online instructional delivery. Not so many teachers are prepared to do this, especially us, the elderly. We have to learn to use computers, and we have to learn how to use, like what I'm doing now. Who would ever think that I'll be teaching using video, using this gadget? I never realized previously how teaching would be so tough for us. Good for the millennials. You are so attuned to the use of these gadgets, but we have all right the content, but how to deliver this using these gadgets is something that we need to master first of all. Anyway, let's move on. So the changing nature of work and the skill requirement demands that Teachers, especially in the higher ed, should use OBE. What else is OBE in response to? OBE or OBTL is in response to government-mandated reforms in education that emphasize specification of educational outcomes across the entire educational continuum. So take note of the concept educational outcomes. We have to define very specifically what we want the students to be able to show at the end of our teaching. So, in fact, when we teach, it's not the activity that should be emphasized, but the outcome of this activity that we get the students to go through. So if we plan an activity for them, we have to have in mind what should this activity be able to do to the students. In other words, what will the students get out of performing or engaging in the activity? We have to be very clear about that in our mind and, of course, in our practice. What is OBE or OBTL in response to? It's also in response to evolving accreditation requirements. So you see, you probably have heard of AACO, PAASCO, all these accrediting bodies require higher educational institutions to show results, to show outcomes of teaching, and they check on this. So the accreditation requirements demands for us teachers to make use of OBE or OBTL. And finally, the OBE or OBTL is in response to continuous quality improvement to ensure responsiveness to changing landscapes in the workplace, education reform, and accreditation. So, we do OBE or OBTL so we can continuously improve our teaching or instruction. So that's why the emphasis is on OBE or OBTL. What's the philosophy behind OBE and what are the benefits that could be had from the use of OBE? Okay? The philosophy of OBE approach is embodied in the constructive alignment framework, a concept coming from John Day's constructive alignment framework. Of course, you had been introduced to what we call constructivism in your other courses. So you have heard, you must be familiar with the philosophy constructivism. By the way, constructivism, if you will read literature, is not just a philosophy. It also is a psychological principle. So in fact, constructivism is both philosophical and psychological. Let's go to constructive alignment framework. What do we mean by constructive? Constructive comes from the constructivist theory that holds that learners use their own activity to construct their knowledge as interpreted through their own schemata. In our heads, we have schemes or schema. These are entrenched or embedded in our heads. Probably some of these are unclear to us. Some of these have just been something that we picked up from people, which may not be necessarily true or valid, but embedded in our heads. If they are not true, if they are not valid, then what should be done about this schema? They have to be reconstructed. Okay, who will do the reconstruction? Who does the thinking, by the way? It's you. So if there is something wrong with the way you think about certain ideas, it's you and you alone who can remodel that, reshape that idea, reconstruct that idea. Through what? Through what means? Maybe through reading, through interaction with other people, through thinking things through many ways. So nothing is fixed in our head. It's continuously being, ideas in our head are continuously being reconstructed. And the reconstruction, reconstitution, remodeling, reshaping of these ideas is our own lookout. Ulit po, Constructive comes from the constructivist theory that holds that learners use their own activity to construct their knowledge as interpreted through their own schemata. Again, I would like to underscore this phrase, holds that learners use their own activity. So it's only in engaging in activities that learners construct meanings of things. So what does this imply of us teachers? This implies that we have to get the students to be engaged in activities. It is our role as teachers to think of appropriate activities or meaningful activities so that the students will derive something from these activities. Could be new knowledge, could be reconstruction of old knowledge, could be reshaping of this knowledge. It goes on in the heads of individuals. Through what? Through the activity or through the activities that we ask them to engage in. Constructive alignment framework. The next concept to be clarified about is alignment. What is alignment? Alignment is a principle in curriculum theory that holds that assessment tasks should be aligned to what is intended to be learned, as in Criterion-referenced assessment. All right. I stated earlier that we need to be able to formulate objectives that are measurable, that are observable, so that we can base our assessment. We can anchor our assessment to these objectives. If we do that, then we say that our assessment is aligned to the objectives. If we make an assessment, let's say a test, that is not aligned to the objectives that we have formulated, then we fail. Our test is not valid. We need to align. We construct the objectives. We make the tests to test whether the objective has been realized. But we need to help our students to realize the objectives by providing them learning experiences. Like, anong learning experiences? Maybe providing them with reading materials, providing them with lectures like what we are doing now, providing them with um, assignments in the fields, anything that they will pick learning from, no? And these learning experiences must be so carefully planned by the teachers, no, so that these activities get aligned to the objectives. So there are three things that we need to align when we plan our lessons. Firstly, when we construct the objectives, we have to have in mind, how shall I know that the objectives had been realized? So, in fact, we shall be thinking already about how we might be able to measure the realization of the objectives. All right, having done that, we should also plan very carefully the experiences that we need to expose the students to. Which experiences will get them to learn or realize the objectives faster, better. Okay? And so these three elements of the teaching learning process must be aligned. Let's try again. What are these three elements of the teaching learning process that should be aligned? The objectives, the learning experiences, and the objectives. Let's talk a little more about the learning experiences, although you have this in some of your courses. When we say learning experiences, we talk about the learning approaches, learning strategies, learning methodologies, learning techniques that we expose our students to, the varied activities that happen inside the classroom or outside of the classroom that we hope the students would be able to, we hope that would help the students attain the objectives. So all these are planned together simultaneously. What happens if during the assessment we find out that the objectives had been barely realized? What happens? We need to think about why. Why did the students not learn? Of course, there are so many factors, and one factor could be you, yourself as a teacher. Maybe, like now, maybe I'm boring you. Maybe in a regular classroom, the classroom has an atmosphere that's not conducive to learning. Maybe the learner is not ready to learn. Maybe something is bugging his mind. So there are so many factors that would impede the learning of the students. A teacher has to be quick or alert to realize what these factors are that impede learning and do something about it. We cannot just go on and on and on teaching without measuring whether the teaching that happens is resulting in the outcome that we would like the students to acquire or to show. We have to be alert to that. So, it says here about alignment is a principle in curriculum theory that holds that assessment tasks should be aligned to what is intended to be learned, as in Criterion-referenced assessment. Okay, let's talk about Criterion-referenced assessment so we can be more clarified about what alignment is. Okay. In the K-12, the new curriculum, Criterion-referenced is advised to be used. What do we mean by criterion reference? The K-12 curriculum, the DepEd has already prepared for the teachers from kindergarten to senior high school, grade 12. They have already prepared for us the content standards. In other words, what is to be taught per year level. What is to be taught, how much is to be taught within a prescribed period. So content standard is already spelled out for us. Vis-a-vis with the content standard, we are also given the performance standard. Performance standard is spelled out by the DepEd for us, teachers. So we don't need to think about this anymore. The people upstairs, the DepEd people, the policy makers had already thought this for us. All we need to do is implement this or do adjustment depending on what our learners need. All right, so our assessment must be based on the content standard and the performance standard to be aligned, to them. So we need to understand what are these content standard and performance standard so that we can align our assessment to these standards. Okay? I wish this were a regular classroom so we could I could ask you, what is it that you don't understand? Anyway, if you don't understand something, this is what you're going to do. Of course, there's an email, and I hope you are connected. You can always ask me to email to you answers to questions. Is that all right with you? Email and I will try to answer. In addition, if you are not content with the answer, I'll send you some literature to read. This way, I'm sure some of the questions that you have in your mind would be clarified. I wish this were a regular classroom, but our wish is not tenable right now. All right. What did I say? You only have to email and I'll try to respond.